sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. Today I want to get right down to the basics of quilting. I want to talk about quilts made with squares. Sometimes they're called one-patch quilts. This is a four-patch, an old example of a lot of fabrics, and somehow putting all those colors together just works. It's beautiful. So I thought I'd bring you along. I want to begin a couple of charity quilts. I want to do some mindless sewing, just sew some squares together. It's peaceful and it feels good, you know, to make a quilt for somebody else. I might make a couple of doll quilts for my granddaughters, and I'm just going to use squares. So let's get started. I'll bring you along and tell you what I'm doing and why I'm choosing the pieces I'm choosing to put together. I'll put a little thought into it, but let's get started. For this quilt, I pulled out my 2.5-inch square drawer. Yes, there's a lot of squares in there. And I'm going, in this quilt, I'm going for soft and pretty. Greens and pinks, and I will probably emphasize green and pink, but as you can see, there's orange and there's blues. I'll probably have an equal amount of blue and some yellow. Think about Easter colors or little girl colors, but I do like to add that little bit of blue. So I have a pile of pink squares in my drawer. I'll lay these out, and when I start sewing these together, I will sew them together in, I'll sew them together in rows. First I will just chain piece, you know, sew two without cutting or stopping, and then I will start arranging them into rows of 4 and then 6, and I might get up to 8. We'll see how big the quilt is, because this will be a little doll quilt for my granddaughter. So I'll start sewing some squares together, and that's kind of what I'm thinking when I make this one. Sometimes I will add something with a little bit of contrast, like this darker fabric right there, little pops of that. But for the most part, when I make this quilt with all kinds of fabrics, I just like to think about a color palette, and sometimes you can find a fabric that has some of the colors in it that you're working with. You can just choose a fabric like this. This has pink and green and yellow in it. And this one has quite a few fabrics in it. This is a leftover from another project, but that's got the blue. So that helps you figure out what colors you can add to your quilt. So I'm going to sew some squares solid. This was a leftover project that someone gave to me a long time ago, and I want you to notice something about it because it might apply to you. Some of these squares are not squares. They didn't come out. I don't know, yeah, see, that seam allowance is way off there. They decided, oops, I don't want the salvage in there, so I'll just leave it in the seam. So that square did not come out right. But I'm going to tell you that I think it's just fine if things don't match up. They started not matching up right about here, and it kept going, and it really doesn't matter, does it? It kind of looks okay. So I'm going to lay these out, kind of alternating the blues and the prints, the star print, and I'm going to sew them together, and I am not going to worry about those seams, especially when you're a beginner at the quilting. The seams don't always come out just right. You want to work on your 1/4-inch seam, but if it's not right, it's okay. You could even jog these a little bit and make the seams go in the middle of all of them, and then it's even less noticeable. But it makes such a pretty quilt. You only have one print, and then you have a whole bunch of blues, and it comes out great. So I'm going to sit down and sew some of these strips of blocks together and see how they made strips. It's one way to piece your blocks together. Just sew them in strips and then sew those strips together. Sometimes we think we need to do 4, 4, 4 and put those together, but sewing in rows like this is real easy to do. So here's the beginning of our quilt, just blues and that print fabric. And I know for some of you, when seams don't match, it kind of bothers you a little bit, but I don't mind it. So I'm able to put that together with no qualms at all. I'm easy on my mind, and I think it's kind of fun. So I'm going to continue with this quilt, and it will be a great quilt to donate to charity when I'm done. Here's another patch quilt I'm in the middle of working on. It began with some patches I made for pillows for a friend that I had left over. I didn't need these two, and I had some extra strips cut. These are all 2.5-inch squares that were already sewn together, and they kind of go together. So I'm going to start sewing, beginning with these two big quilt blocks right here. I'm going to start adding around, and you can see the color, very masculine kind of colors, browns, blues in this one. If I stuck a white in there, I think I'd be in trouble. It would stick out like a sore